Make sure you have these notes in front of you. I cut off the top just so I could have some more space, but you should make sure you have your name, the date, and the period at the top because you're going to show us these in order to get points for doing the notes. Today we're talking about integers on a number line, and we're also going to talk about distance a little bit. But to recap from the other day, integers are positive or negative whole numbers, so make sure you write that in there. I know my handwriting is hard to write neatly on here, so I'll do my best. Negative whole numbers. Up until 6th grade, you always learned about only whole numbers, the numbers 0 and up. When we put negatives in front of them, that becomes integers. So positive and negative whole numbers are integers. And let's just review a little bit of this. Mark a point at both 5 and -5 on the number line below. I'm going to mark -5 first. I like to do negatives in red. And I'll change my pen color and put blue for +5. Okay, make sure you have those marked. It says describe what you notice to be the difference. Well, interestingly enough, 5 is 5 points away from 0, and -5 is going in the other direction, but it's also 5 away from 0. So I wonder how much the distance is between the two of these numbers. Now I'm going to count the spaces. Don't count the space that it's on. So watch, we count the jumps. 1 jump, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, so -5 to +5 is a difference of 10. We don't care if it's positive or negative. Distance is only positive. So make sure that we know that this was a difference of 5. And notice I put these bars around it. This is -5, but I still put the bars around it. And if you recall, the bars mean absolute value. That means each of those are 5 away from 0. So let's review absolute value a little bit. If you need to doodle on this, go for it. The absolute value of a number is the distance. So write distance. Oh, it's hard for me to write on this. Away from 0 on the number line. So we know +5 has an absolute value of 5. It's the distance of 5 from 0. We also know that the absolute value of -5 is also 5 because it's also 5 jumps away from 0. Now this next one says magnitude. We're not going to talk about magnitude too much, so we're just going to cross that out. Magnitude is another name, just kind of talking about the size of something. For example, when we talk about absolute value, -5, the absolute value of -5 is literally read that way. The absolute value, maybe if I write in cursive, it'll be better. Absolute value it's value of -5. So we always read it as the absolute value, okay? Make sure you have this. Make sure you have this before I scroll down the page, please. We're going to do a little practice here, and it says determine the absolute value. Then mark each point on the number line. The absolute value of -8 is +8. So let's make a dot at 8 and put the letter A up there. The absolute value of -1 is +1. We'll put a B there. The absolute value of +3 is still 3. The absolute value of -4.5 is +4.5. The absolute value of 6 is still 6. I'm going to put an E there, but I want to try one more thing with you. What if the letter F said the negative absolute value of 6? Because the negative is outside the brackets, That means the absolute value of 6 is 6, but now the negative is outside. So that means whatever we get for the absolute value, we have to negate. And this would give us a negative 6 all the way down here. Label it with an F, please. Okay, now it says complete the table below. Using the table to the left, determine which two columns could be added to get the sum of 0. If I have the number negative 6, what's its absolute value? Its absolute value is positive 6. Well, in this case, what's the opposite of negative 6? It's also positive 6. Now, if I added 6 and 6, I would not get 0. But if I took this number and added its absolute value, I certainly would. If I had the number 18 and I found its absolute value, I would see that it would be positive 18 still. It didn't change. If I add 18 and 18, I do not get 0. But the opposite of 18 is negative 18, and I know these two columns would add to 0. If I had the number 34, the absolute value is again 34. Its opposite is negative 34. And I know the opposites add to 0. The other word for opposites are additive inverse. The absolute value of negative 67 is positive 67. The opposite of those is 67. The absolute value of negative 128 is positive 128. And the opposite of negative 128 is 128. Oh, and I forgot the last row should be circled here. And these two should be circled because we are looking for the opposites. That is what makes the additive inverse and makes a 0 pair. I'm going to scroll down, which means the page will erase. Please make sure you have this before I erase it. Yep. Okay, moving on. We're going to model some here. It says model the following problems with a number line. Begin your model at 0. Okay, so I've got my blue clicked and it says start at 0. This one says to go to negative 1 first. I did that. Now it says add 4. Adding goes in the opposite direction. So I'm going to add 1, 2, 3, 4. Where did I land? At positive 3. The next one, I start at 0, but the first number here is a positive 1. So this time I'm not going to the left for 1, I'm going to the right. Now where do I go? Well, this was a plus. It says add negative 4. So if I'm adding a negative 4, it really means I'm going to just add negative 4. I'm going to add going in the opposite direction. 1, 2, 3, 4. Where did I land? Negative 3. This next one gets a little different. Start at 0, but go to negative 1. And this time I add more negatives. So I'm going to start from my negative 1, but I'm still going to the negative direction for more. 1, 2, 3, 4. Where did I land? I landed at negative 5. This last one, ooh, that looks pretty easy. Start at 0, go to 1. This is old school math. From here, I'm going to go 4 to the right because they're positives. Where do I end up? I end up at positive 5. I want you to look very closely at these. Why did I end up with 3's up here? Did you notice the signs were different? I have a positive and a negative. I have a positive and a negative. I got 3's. In this case, the signs were the same. I got a 5, and it was a negative 5 because the other two signs were negatives. In this case, the signs were the same. I got a 5. I kept the positive. So start thinking about these rules. I'm going to clear the screen. Let's move down. Now we're going to try a few more with the same numbers, but if you notice, this time I'm subtracting. Subtraction is kind of like finding the distance. It's like saying, what's the distance between 1 and 4? So I'm going to start at 1, or I'm going to start at 0, sorry. We're going to go to 1. But this time it says take away 4. So I'm going to start here and I'm going to move to the left. 1, 2, 3, 4. What's the distance between those two numbers? It's 3, but because I'm moving left, it's asking us for direction 2, and we have a negative 3. Number 6, we start at negative 1. We start at 0, sorry. We start at 0 and we go to -1. But this one says take away 4 more negatives. So I'm going to take away, well, I'm not taking away 4 more negatives, sorry. I'm moving left 4 more. 1, 2, 3, 4. Where did I land? -5. If you notice, the number here was when I added 1 and 4 together because the signs were the same. I just kept adding more negatives. In this first one, I had a positive, and then I took things away, so really found the difference between the two. Let's try 7. I have -1, so let's start at 0 and go to, whoops, wrong direction. Let me erase. Why is it the wrong direction? Because it's a -1 to start. It happens. Start at 0. Draw to -1. Now this time, this is where it gets a little confusing. Do you notice that there are 2 signs in the middle? It says subtract the -4. Well, if I'm subtracting a -4, that means I really want to take away those negatives, which means I'm going to do the opposite. That really means I'm going to add a +4. So I ended up at -1. I'm going to draw underneath. This time I'm moving to the right. 1, 2, 3, 4. And it gets tricky, but once you know the rules, it won't be too bad. I ended up at +3, and I'm going to stop there because the rest of these we are going to do in a game. Good luck. Make sure you have all this too before I clear the screen. Yes, clear the screen.